We're in a season of the year that within the Christian church generally and within our church particularly, we're getting focused on what Jesus did to die and to go to die in a very intentional way. We've been singing about that already here today. We've been looking at this over the last couple of weeks, and for the last couple of weeks, we've looked at a couple of different passages in the Gospel of John, John being one of the 4 biographies of the life of Jesus that we have in the New Testament, to look at the reasons it was that Jesus was killed. And we've been talking about this question of why is it that this person who is widely regarded as a really decent person, a really good guy, a really nice guy who just told people to love one another, why in the world would a guy like that get killed? And we've been looking at this, and we've found some things about Jesus that make him more than just a nice guy who told people to love each other. I mean, we saw last week, or 2 weeks ago, for example, about how Jesus from the outset said, the world is evil. What the world does is wrong, and by the way, I'm not a part of it. So all the rest of you do evil, and I don't. And people have a hard time with that. We looked last week about how Jesus was very intentional about how nobody took Jesus' life, Jesus gave it. Jesus as the one who intentionally sacrificed his life, intentionally had the authority from God to lay down his life, to choose to die, to choose to submit himself to death, so that people who trusted in him could then have eternal life and abundant life. And today we're going to continue on with this same theme of looking at why was Jesus killed. And to answer this question today, we've got to talk at length about a term that is a term that if you're a Christian, you need to know this term. You need to understand what this term means. It's really important for us as Christians, really important to what the Bible says, and really important to how we're supposed to think and function and act as we look at yet another reason today of why Jesus died. And in order to do that, we need to understand the term the world. We need to know what the world is, what the world means. And in the course of doing that today, I want to kind of put my finger on some things that might help you to understand why it is that you feel uncomfortable in life, why it is that in different situations that you're in or different groups of people you're in, you feel like you don't fit, you feel like you don't fit in, why it is that there are always these niggling problems and hassles and difficulties and conflicts even when things are going their best, much less when things are going really bad, especially with other people, and there are pressures on you and challenges for you and harassment and pain that is very, very difficult to endure. And when you feel like you don't measure up and you don't fit in and you don't belong with a group of people that you're with, or that your group doesn't belong with the wider group, I want to answer some of those questions for you of why it is you have that pain of not being adjusted to the rest of the people around you, okay? And that has everything to do with why it is that Jesus died. So we've got to talk about what the world is. The world is a term that shows up in the New Testament. So the books of Matthew through Revelation in the Bible shows up in the New Testament a lot. And it means a variety of different things. It's a flexible sort of term. Sometimes the world means the sort of thing that we mean that when we say it, right? The world means the whole physical universe, right? Like the world. The world means this planet Earth. That's the world. The world sometimes is used to mean all the people who live on this planet, there's me and then there's the rest of the world, or there's our group or our community or our tribe and then the rest of the world, right? So the term world can mean all those things, but it means something else as well. And to understand what the world means, especially as Jesus is talking about it here to his disciples, to his followers here in John 15, we need to go a little bit deeper as to what the world is all about. See, in this moment where Jesus is talking to them, as you've seen these last few weeks, if you've been here, we've been skipping through the Gospel of John. We were in chapter 7 2 weeks ago. We were in chapter 10 last week. Now we're in chapters 15 and 16 this week. And so we're skipping a lot of stuff in the middle. And I should point out to you one of the things that we just skipped over. One of the things that we just skipped over between chapter 10 and chapter 15 is Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. Jesus was a Jew from Galilee, which is today in northern Israel, and Jerusalem is in like central southern Israel. And Jesus would periodically come to Jerusalem. He would go from his home to Jerusalem with other Jews who were celebrating the great festivals. There were 3 great annual festivals that happened every year where everybody would gather in Jerusalem and would celebrate these together. And Jesus would go back and forth. And he did this often. And there's a particular one that he was going to, one of the times of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which began with a festival called the Passover. And that was memorializing God bringing his nation, Israel, when they were enslaved in Egypt, bringing them out in the 15th century BC, out of their slavery in Egypt, and to take them into the land that he had promised them. And so Jesus was going with other Galilean Jews and with Jews from all over the world to celebrate this particular festival. And this was going to be a big one because this is the last time that Jesus was going to go to Jerusalem, because he was going knowing that when he went this time, he was going to be betrayed into the hands of the authorities there, the Jewish authorities there, the local authorities who were the chief priests who were running the temple, and also scribes and teachers who were the teachers of the law, and that they were going to take him, they were going to arrest him, they were going to convict him falsely, and they were going to turn him over to the Roman government, and the Romans were going to execute him. Jesus knew that this was going to happen. He told his disciples it was going to happen. He said that he was setting them up for it. They couldn't get it. They couldn't understand it. It didn't make sense to them, but he said, this is what's going to happen, and then I'm going to rise again on the 3rd day. And by the way, this is God's plan, and this is what he actually said in the prophets all along was going to happen. It didn't compute to them, but this is what he was telling them time after time. And so this time that Jesus enters the Jerusalem, he's gone many times to celebrate these different festivals, but this time that he comes in, the people that he's coming with believe him to be the chosen one, believe him to be the anointed one, the Messiah, the Christ, the person who is the Son of the living God, who is going to come and set up a new and perfect world and a new and perfect kingdom, a new and perfect situation. And so they were cutting down palm trees and were waving them before him and laying them down in front of him and saying, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord." And they were coming into Jerusalem basically telling everybody in Jerusalem, this is the one, this is the guy, we believe he's the guy, we're totally with him. And all of Jerusalem was unstable, and all of Jerusalem was worried and afraid of what all this was going to mean. And the powers that be wanted to see how they could get rid of Jesus before Rome would say, no, Caesar is king, we're going to get rid of you. And so this is the situation that's happened. And by the way, typically Christians celebrate this or remember this the Sunday before Easter. We call it Palm Sunday. Well, because we're going through this like a chunk at a time over the course of weeks, this is actually our Palm Sunday. We don't have palms, but we're actually celebrating Palm Sunday a few weeks earlier. So when we get to the actual Palm Sunday and we're not celebrating Palm Sunday, now you know why. It's because we're taking longer to go through this set of material, okay? So Jesus comes in and he's teaching and making people really, really mad, and he's making the common people really, really excited as he's making the leadership really, really mad. And then on the night of the Passover itself, where they're celebrating the Passover, he's with his disciples, his 12 closest ones, and he's starting to tell them some things that are the last things that he's going to tell them before he goes to the cross, which he knows about. And one of the things that he tells them is this section here in John 15 and 16, where he says in John 15, verse 18, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. So we got to understand, what is this world thing that he's talking about? Is he talking about the physical universe hated him? Well, not exactly. Is he talking about this planet hated him? Well, not exactly. Is he talking that like all the people in the world hated him? Well, kind of, but not exactly. To understand what he means when he says the world hates you, we need to define the world. And the best way to understand the world in what Jesus is talking about here is to think about rules. Every group has rules. Every group has rules. A group that doesn't have rules is not a group. It's just a collection of individuals. And some of the rules are written down. In fact, within communities that have governments, then the rules are written down in the form of law. And you have to obey the law. In a company, the rules are written down in the form of company policy, right? In a school, the rules are written down in the form of, the student handbook, right? So some rules are written down. But every group, even groups that have rules that are written down, also have rules that are unwritten. And one of the rules of the group is that the unwritten rules are stronger than the written rules. Unwritten rules are way more powerful than written rules because they're so powerful that they don't need to be written down in order for people to follow them. And the rules that are the most powerful yet are the ones that nobody even thinks about. Like, nobody even conceives of breaking these rules. That's how strong they are. Let me give you an example of this. Let's say that you're going to Heinz Field in Pittsburgh on a Sunday afternoon in the fall, on a day when there are many, many other people who are going to Heinz Field on that same Sunday afternoon. Except, as you're walking in, you find that almost everybody there is wearing black and gold. And they're wearing a particular logo that has these three, red, yellow, and blue diamonds on them. And it says the word Steelers. And everybody's walking in wearing something on them that has this. But you're walking in wearing not black and gold, but the black and purple jersey of the Baltimore Ravens. Okay? Now people are going to be looking at you, and not giving you the same, like friendly gestures and smiles and so forth that indicate we're on the same side, we're on the same team. They're either going to be trying not to look at you, or they're going to be looking at you kind of weird, or they're even going to be like kind of snarling at you. Now, that gets enough, like that is something that you would definitely feel the pressure around you if you're wearing that Ravens jersey when you're going to a Steelers game. But imagine, if you want to take it a step further, imagine you're wearing that Ravens jersey to a Steelers game in a game that the Ravens aren't even playing. Like the Steelers are playing the Broncos or something, and you walk into Heinz Field wearing a Ravens jersey. Okay, now you really start to upset people, right? Because at least they could understand, okay, the Ravens are here in town. There's a Ravens fan who came to see their team play. But if the Ravens aren't even in the stadium and you're choosing to wear the colors of the Steelers' most vicious rival, that is a statement, man. And people are going to get downright nasty to you at that point. Who do you think you are? What are you doing? Security is going to be following you because they know that if they don't, then, bodily harm could come to you in that situation. They might rip the jersey off of you and, set it on fire or something like that, right? Now, let me ask you this. Is there a rule, is there a law in the city of Pittsburgh or in Allegheny County or in the National Football League or in the Pittsburgh Steelers that says that it's illegal for you to wear a Baltimore Ravens jersey to Heinz Field on a Sunday afternoon? No. There's no written rule because the unwritten rule is so much more powerful than the written rule, okay? And the thing is, every group has unwritten rules. They're not written down, they're not laws, but they're community standards of this is how we do what we do. And those standards shape the perspective of reality of the people who are in that community. It becomes such a part of that group of people that it's as if it's one of the laws of physics. It's like the law of gravity. It's like this is just the way it is. We don't think about it. We don't question it. It's just how it goes. And every group of humans has rules like that. whether it's as small as a household, or a wider family, like a whole family, extended family, or a school, or a team, or a community organization, or a city, or a corporation, or a labor union, or a religious tribe, or a political party, or a social class, or a culture, or a nation. Every group of humans has rules. And the rules of these different groups are different from each other. And you learn that they're different when you transfer from one to another. Anybody who has gotten married has learned this principle. When you were dating or engaged to the person, you thought that you were a lot alike in a lot of ways, and maybe you were. But then when you get married and you spend your first few holidays with your spouse's family, then like all kinds of things you just take for granted of this is how family is, you find to be, this is how my family is, but not how every family in the world is. And it's all kinds of things, little things about when we eat or what we do before the meal or during the meal or after the meal or what we do at night or the kinds of things we talk about, the kinds of things we don't talk about, the kinds of jokes we tell, the kind of jokes we don't tell. All of these different things are all these rules that you discover when you enter into a new group of people. So all the different groups in the world have these rules that are all different from one another. But the rules of each group, no matter how different they are all of three kinds. Of a particular group, some of the rules they have fit God's rules, meaning that within that group there are certain things that are right and certain things are wrong that conform to God's perspective on what's right and what's wrong. So there are lots of communities where, it's wrong to steal. God agrees. It's wrong to steal, right? So that's a rule that connects with God's rules. Some rules, however, don't fit God's rules, but they aren't bad as long as they don't go above God's rules. For example, it's fine that there's an unwritten rule not to wear a Baltimore Ravens jersey to a Steelers game, especially if the Ravens are not playing in that game. There's nothing particularly wrong with that rule for the Steelers nation. But if that rule goes above God's rule of, not to do violence to another person, right, then you've got a problem. Like if somebody actually does violence to the person wearing the Ravens jersey because it's breaking the rule, well, now you've got the Steelers nation rule has just gone above God's rules about how you're supposed to treat other people. And then it becomes bad. But the final kind of rule is that some rules are bad of themselves because they clash with God's rules. In other words, within groups of people, there are almost always, won't say almost always, I will say literally always, in every group of people, no matter how good that group is, there will be rules that they have that they call right what God calls wrong, and they call wrong what God calls right. Always. There are things that do not fit. That do not fit. And the reason for this is that above and behind all of these groups with all of their different rules is one figure who rules them all. One figure who rules them all. And unfortunately, I don't have my computer here to, flash up different verses on the screen. So what and I've got to jump to a lot of verses today. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to state very clearly what the reference is. So if you want to look these up later on your own, you can write them down while I tell you. I'm going to jump to John. Hopefully your Bible is open here to John 15 and 16. I'm going to jump to a chapter before chapter 14, verse 30. What Jesus says to his disciples in John 14:30, he says, I will not speak with you much longer, for the prince of this world is coming. He has no hold on me. I will speak with you much longer, for the prince of this world is coming. There is this entity called the prince of this world. This person who's running behind all of these different groups with their different rules. If you look in 1 John, so the first letter of John, it's called 1 John, 1 John, which is toward the back of the Bible, chapter 5, verse 19, John writes in that chapter, in that verse, he writes, we know that we are children of God, and that the whole world is under the control of the evil one. The whole world is under the control of the evil one. Okay? So again, it's this evil figure, this evil person who is secretly behind the scenes, invisibly running this world. And the Bible describes this figure in a lot of different terms. It describes this figure as an angel who fell from God and who rebelled against God and is now at war with God. And he's called the accuser. He's called the tempter. He's called the adversary. He's called the enemy. He's called the evil one. In Hebrew, he is called the Satan, which we transliterate into Satan. And in Greek, he was called the Diabolos, or slanderer, which we transliterate into devil. And this guy, this spiritual thing, this spiritual force and entity and power, with his other entities and powers, other fallen angels that he is dominating, are behind and above all of these different groups of humans, getting them to do things and manipulating them in ways that are contrary to God. And the reason that the devil rules all of these different groups is because despite all of the many differences they have from each other, despite the many different clashing rules they have, where this family is different from that family, and this team is different from that team, and this nation is at war with that nation, and this culture is different from that culture, no matter how different they are, all groups of people have one of two rules in common. Either me first or we first. Every single one. Every single group of humans has a rule, either me first or we first. Me first means that one of our rules as a group is that you as an individual, and that each of us as an individual, has the authority and the right and the liberty to get what we want for ourselves, to make ourselves happy, to get ourselves satisfied, to see ourselves fulfilled, and to make our own choices, to have our own perspective on what's right and wrong, to have our own viewpoint of good and evil, to have our own truth that is individual to us, and to do our thing our way for ourselves. Me first. The other rule that some groups have is we first, meaning that you, the individual, do not have any particular rights. You don't have any particular value except your value within our whole tribe, your value within our whole team, no I in team, right? Your value within our family, your value within our nation. But we as a unit are going to pursue what's best for us ahead of that group over here, ahead of that group over there, ahead of that nation, ahead of that team, ahead of that business, ahead of that community, ahead of that whatever. We come first, and we're going to get what's ours. And there are some groups that manage to combine the two. You can be me first about this stuff, but we're going to be we first about this stuff. But every single group has as part of its rules me first or we first or a combination of both. Because the evil one does not need you to worship him to have your allegiance. The devil does not need you to worship him to have your allegiance. He just needs you to worship you. Or he just needs you to worship your group, to worship your family, to worship your tribe, to worship your country, to worship your religion, to worship your political party, to worship your business, to worship your football team. He just needs you to worship anything but God. As long as you worship anything but God, you're on his side. He doesn't need you to worship him. He just wants you to worship you, or to worship your group of whatever tribe you associate with. That's what his kingdom is all about. That's what he's doing, because his objective as a rebel against God is to get this entire world to rebel against God. And he's done so. And this is the world. The world. What is the world? The world is the system of humans living together where sin feels normal and righteousness is strange. where the deepest and most powerful rule is me first or we first and never God first, all under the silent dominion of the evil one. That is what the world is. Okay, I will give you this when I'm done. Because of this, the world gives the people in it both comfort and pain. It gives comfort because it's familiar. The world is our native habitat. The world is what we're used to. The world is where we belong. The world is what we were born into, and we naturally fit into it. We naturally conform to me first and we first. Nobody needed to teach us how to do this. This comes automatically to people. But the world gives us pain because it's a vicious place. I mean, as Jesus said in John 14, verse 27, he says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives." I do not give to you as the world gives. Because, see, the world makes promises that it doesn't deliver on. The world promises peace and doesn't deliver on it. The world promises satisfaction but doesn't deliver on it. The world promises that if you just get this thing, then you'll be happy, but you won't. The world promises that if you just do what you're supposed to do, then everything's going to be fine for you, but it isn't. The world promises that if you just toe the line, if you just conform, then you're going to be successful, but you're not. The world promises if you just do it our way, then you're going to have peace, but you don't. The world is a nasty place because it's filled with me first and we first people who are competing with you. And sometimes they win. And even when you win, you can't be happy about it because you might lose tomorrow. You can never really get satisfied. You can never really have peace. Now, ironically, even though the world is about rejecting God first, God is the one who made the world. God is the one who made this world in the first place. God made it through his Son. In the very, very first words of the book of John, John 1 through 4, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." This is the word that God speaks that is yet somehow God itself, that is separate from God even though it is God. And it's not just an it, it's a he. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. God had a word that he spoke, who is a son that he begot. And through his Son, the Father and the Son together as one God with the Holy Spirit, 3 in 1 and 1 in 3, created all other things, created this world. The Father made it through the Son. But the evil one twisted the world to make it what it is now. So God sought to redeem the world, to save the world from itself for himself. And he sought to save it the same way he made it. The Father made the world through the Son. He sought to save the world through his Son. Again, in the Gospel of John, I keep just going elsewhere in John. John 3:16 and 17. "For God so loved the world." He so loved this world that was in rebellion against him. The way that God loved a world that said me first, we first, and not you first, is by giving his one and only Son. That whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. See, the world being out of joint, the world saying me first, we first, is not going to last. It's not going to last. It's not going to make it. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But God sent his Son to redeem the world by taking people out of the world, detaching them from the world, separating them from the world, so when the whole world goes down like a ship that's sinking, some people will be saved for a new world, a perfect one. But there is a problem. And the problem is also in John 1, verses 9 and 10. It says, "The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world." So the Word, the Son, the light, all the same thing, all the same person. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. The world didn't recognize him. I mean, what an irony is that? This is the one who's the living blueprint of the world. The world was made through him, but the world didn't even recognize who he was. He actually came into the world and became a human being in the world. The Son of God, God the Son, God behind the world, God through whom God made the world, comes into the world as a human being, and the world doesn't even recognize who he is. Can't see. See, the devil did recognize him. The devil knew immediately who he was. He knew exactly who he was, and he sought to corrupt him or destroy him. But he also sought to blind the rest of the world as to who he was, and the devil was successful in that. The world could not see him, could not recognize him. You read the whole book of John from beginning to end, you just see this sequence of people not recognizing, of not getting, of being like, I think I know who he is. No, he couldn't be that. Well, what if he's this? Well, what if he's that? Well, how about this? I think he's this. Well, you're a moron. You don't know what you're talking about. I mean, it's this whole conflict that roils for chapter after chapter after chapter after chapter, trying to figure out who is this person named Jesus from Nazareth? Who is this guy? He's not a normal person. He does these powerful things that defy the natural order. I mean, he raises dead people, he heals sick people, he takes a little bit of food and he multiplies it so thousands of people can eat. I mean, clearly this guy is getting a power source from someplace beyond us, but what in the world is this person? We can't figure him out, we can't recognize him, we don't get him. The world couldn't recognize who he was because he didn't know his Father either. The world didn't know God. They didn't know the Father, so therefore they couldn't recognize the Son, because the Father and the Son are one. Now, when a person steps out of line from the world, there are usually two consequences. One consequence is that when a person steps out of line from the world and says, you know what, I don't care what your rules are. I'm not living according to your rules. Your rules don't bother me. That's not going to change me. I'm free of that. I don't need to conform to your expectations. When somebody steps out of line, some people love that person because it's an offer of freedom. Some people see that person as a revolutionary, as a leader. Some people feel like they themselves hate the expectations of the world around them. And this person who's stepping out of line, who's doing something different, is a revolutionary. That maybe if I follow him, I can have the freedom that this person has. And there have been lots of revolutionaries through history of different kinds. Some who have brought very positive things by their revolution. People like Martin Luther King Jr. Other people who've brought very negative things with their revolution. Okay, people like Lenin, right? I mean, there's been a lot of different kinds of people stepping outside of the box to do things differently, and other people follow them. And some people love them, because it's an offer of freedom. But the other thing that happens is that other people and the world as a whole hates the person who steps out of line, because that person calls into question the validity of the world itself. See, the thing that the world needs most of all is to believe that the world is God. The thing that the world wants most of all, and that the devil wants most of all, is to convince everybody in it, this is the only reality there is. This is ultimate. This is absolute. This is all there is, baby. This is the only show in town. And what the devil will do is, okay, well, you don't like this group over here, let me introduce you to that group over there. And if you don't like this one over here, let me introduce you to that group over there. And just keep going from group to group, as long as you never have any question that there's anything other than just the groups that are around here on this planet. As long as you don't believe that there's anything more than that, or that if there is anything more than that, it's basically just here to serve our groups as we're doing our own power plays, then you're safe. But when a person steps beyond all of that and says, this whole thing is junk, the world hates it, because it's calling into question the world itself. And the people who hate the person the most are the people who have most to gain from the system the way it is, the people on top. I remember one time when I was in high school, one of the unwritten rules, but very, very powerful rules in my situation, was on the bus that took us from the school to another bus where we would transfer and then go home. And on this bus, one of the unwritten rules is, the older you are, the further to the back of the bus you can sit. Anybody familiar with this rule from school, right? The older you are, the further back on the bus you can sit. I remember one time I was a sophomore, okay? And I went to a private school, and it was K through 12, so we had literally all ages, on this bus. We were going to another place to then get a transfer bus. And we're on our way, and one particular day, it's the end of the school day, and I go, and I'm a sophomore, and so that basically entitles me to sit in like the next to the last seat in the bus, right? So seat, right? So I get to sit in, based on the age distribution on the bus, I got to sit in like the next to the last seat. And there were two freshmen who decided they were going to sit in the last seat in the bus. So these two freshmen get there and sit in the last seat of the bus. There was a senior who came onto the bus and saw these two freshmen in a seat and told her to get out of the seat. And they wouldn't do it. And she told them to get out of the seat, and they wouldn't do it. And let me tell you something. This girl went ballistic. Like, I'm talking like conniption, man. Like, she got totally unhinged. I mean, like, it was madness. I mean, she went after them verbally, like, whoa, and they just wouldn't budge. And then finally, the bus driver's like, you need to sit down so that we can drive. And so then she's got to move up, but then all the seats are taken, so she's got to move like 6 seats up and sits there and is looking back and is like, her face is like purple and the veins are busting out. She's still screaming at him while she's sitting there. It's like, lady, it's a seat on a bus, right? But the people who are in charge, the people who are on top, right? When somebody violates the rules, man, they can't handle it. They cannot handle this, all right? And this is what Jesus does. I mean, Jesus is walking in. He's walking into the temple, and he starts throwing stuff. I mean, like they got tables where they're exchanging Roman money for temple money that then people are buying for sacrifices. He's taking that and throwing them, makes a whip, and is beating people to get out of that temple, driving all the livestock out of it, and says to everybody, my house will be called a house of prayer, it is written. But you have made it a den of thieves. Right? I mean, he has just completely stepped outside the world's rules in doing this. And that is why the world killed Jesus. So you look at John 16, verses 2 and 3. Jesus says, they will put you out of the synagogue. He's talking to his followers here. In fact, a time is coming when anyone who kills you will think he is offering a service to God. They will do such things because they have not known the Father or me. See, what's so ironic and poignant in this situation is that when people are in their world system, especially religious people, they get to a point where they cannot distinguish the world system that they're in and running from God's system. They think they're one and the same. They think if you violate our rules, you violated God's rules. If you violate the way we do it, you're violating God. And so therefore, these people thought that they were actually doing God a favor by killing Jesus. That's how much they didn't recognize him. The world didn't know who he was because it didn't know his Father. And it hated Jesus because it hated his Father. And it hated his Father because the world is about me first and we first, not God first. And because God is first, then anything that doesn't put God first is hating him. You can't kind of like God. You can kind of like people, you can kind of like food, you can kind of like the house that you live in, but you can't kind of like God. If you kind of like the God who created you and who is totally, completely supreme, then you hate him. You can only love him or hate him because he's complete and he's ultimate and he's total. You can't kind of like him. And the world hated him. And now it's easy for us to say, well, that was them. That was them. That was some chief priests and some scribes and some elders and some Roman governmental authorities 2,000 years ago. What does that have to do with me? Well, it has everything to do with you because you were born into the world and it is your natural habitat too. You are part of the system. You are part of the system. You were born into it. Just because you weren't part of that group doesn't mean you're part of the group of all the groups that is under the sway of the evil one. And that means you have to deliberately choose to opt out. You have to deliberately choose to not be a part of the world, to say their rules don't apply to me and I'm dead to them and I don't care what they think. You have to deliberately choose to opt out, but even that won't work. Because as soon as you say, well, I'm not going to be like them, you're saying me first. You're saying me first by saying me different, by saying me better than all the rest of you. And that's the same thing. The devil is totally fine with that. The devil is totally fine with you saying, I'm not going to be like the rest of those bad people. I'm going to be different. I'm going to be different, and I'm going to do the right thing by myself. The devil's totally cool with that because you're still saying me first, which means you're still doing what he wants you to do. There have been lots of religious people who've done that through the ages. So how in the world do we get out? Well, Jesus gives the answer here in John 15. If you look in verse 14, in verse 16, he says, to his disciples, you did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit. And if you skip down to verse 19, he says, if you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. And that is why the world hates you. The only way to get out of the world is if Jesus chooses you out. If Jesus chooses you out, then you can get out. And if you choose Jesus, it means that he's chosen you. Okay? Like you get to opt out because he's opted you out. And the way he opted you out was by going to the cross. The way he opted you out was by going to the cross. That's the only thing that provides you the opportunity to choose him. He's chosen you. That's the only thing that gives you the chance to choose him. And that's what he's done. But once you come out, once you say, yes, I'm with you, I'm not part of the world anymore, now you're exposed to the same non-recognition and hatred that Jesus was. You're exposed to the same thing. Now the world is going to not recognize you. I mean, imagine like if one of the, a child of the most powerful person on the planet walked into a place without any security or anything, so you didn't know who the person was. You might treat that person just like an ordinary person. But if you knew that the way that you treated that person was going to have an impact on whether that person's father or mother looked at you, and how that person might say, thank you so much for how you treated my daughter today, or thank you so much how you treated my son today. Why don't you come to the family island? Something like that. It would change how you would treat that person. But the thing is, the people who opt out of this world, and are then connected with Jesus and his kingdom, are now children of the king, but the world doesn't recognize us. The world doesn't recognize who you are. Doesn't recognize who I am. They don't know how important we are. They don't get it. And also because we've opted out of the world system and we conflict with how the world does what it does, it hates us. Just like it hated him. Just like it hated him. And it also puts us in the position where we've got to make choices with what we do in our lives. We've got to make choices about what we do in our behaviors. Back in 1 John, I'm swinging back to that epistle, 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For everything in the world, the cravings of sinful man, the lust of his eyes, and the boasting of what he has and does, comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but the man who does the will of God lives forever. See, this world is dying. This world is passing away. This world wants to make you think that it's totally permanent, but it's not. It's going away. It's fading. It's crumbling. It's decaying. And when Jesus comes back a second time, he's going to destroy it and judge it. It's going to be gone, baby, gone. And so in the meantime then, if you love the stuff that's part of it, you're going to go with it then. And the stuff that's part of it are the lusts of the flesh, the things in us that we want for ourselves in a way that is contrary to the way God wants them for us. Some of them are natural desires, like the desire to sleep, the desire to eat, our sexual desires, these things that we want, but we want them in a way that is not the way God wants us to have them, that makes them gods in and of themselves. Other things like the things that we learn to like, alcohol, drugs, tobacco, these sorts of things. Other things are lusts of the eyes, the things that we see that we want to have. We want to grab. It's shiny, it's flashy, it's pretty, it's beautiful. I like it, I want it, my precious. This stuff that we want. We got to have it. We need to have it. It makes us look good. And that's the third thing, the pride of life. Look at who I am. Look at what I have. Look at my possessions. I fit in with the cool people, not with the uncool people. I fit in with the awesome people, not with the less than awesome people. Look at what I've achieved for myself. Look at the life I've prepared for myself. Look at, I might not be as good as them, but I'm going to be one day, but I'm definitely better than those people down there. All of that stuff, that's part of the rules of the world that's fading away. But the person who does the will of God to love one another, as Jesus laid down his life for us, that person lives forever. So why did Jesus die? Jesus died because the world hated him, because the world did not know him. But you get the opportunity for the world to hate you and not know you too. That is the life of the cross. That's why Jesus said, no one can come after me unless they take up their cross and follow me. But if you follow him, you get eternal life. I want you to take your bulletin that you received when you came in, or a card that's in front of you there. I want you to take the card out of that and tear at the perforation. And on one side it says First Baptist Church of Hollidaysburg, and on the flip side it has some options of what you might do with this message today. And I encourage you to determine what it is that the Lord is calling you to do today, calling you to do, telling you to do in your world, to be in the world but not of you, the world. And as you're thinking through that and making a commitment to the Lord, write that down and take that and put that in your pocket as a reminder to you for this week. Put it on your desk, on your bathroom mirror, on your dashboard, whatever, so that you can remember what that is. And on the other half of the card, if you would please, it's very, very helpful to us. Let's every single one of us, even if you do it every week, do it 1 week more. Take this card, write your name. I'm going to write my name on mine right now. I do this too. Write your name where it says name. And any contact information you don't have for us, write that down too. And on the flip side, any message that you want to send me, if any, please do that, and I'll be in touch. And this is very, very helpful for me to shepherd you, and very, very helpful for what we do. And you can take this part and put it on the wall hanger by the steps on your way down. As you do this, Kelly's going to play a song, and when you complete your talking with God, then continue to talk with God in worship, in song, with the rest of us.